There are multiple so-called plot holes in Naruto and Boruto that aren't really plot holes per se. It's more so a lack of understanding when it comes to the person making that assertion, while sometimes the series doesn't explain a certain concept in the best possible way. In this case, I think the latter applies, in the sense that the Karma Seal's mechanism has far too many logical inconsistencies. This goes back to the basic function of the Karma Seal itself, which would be to Otsutsuify the vessel's body. However, the issue is that while the Karma Seal does change the vessel's DNA to that of an Otsutsuki, it doesn't change their physical appearance in any way. Now that should not be possible since your DNA controls what you look like. To prove that this is indeed the case, I did my research on the subject, which brought me to the Penn State Center of Nanoscale Science, which says that DNA contains all of the information needed to build your body. This determines your eye color, hair color, your height, and even the size of your nose. The DNA in your cells is responsible for these physical attributes. So suffice to say that if your genetic data, which is your DNA, is overwritten by the DNA of another species, you should take on the physical attributes of that species. By the way, the writers of Boruto agree with this notion to some extent, but for some reason they later contradicted themselves. You see, as I've explained a few times on this channel, the Karma Seal is stated to be an highly compressed Otsutsuki Baku file. Once that file is implanted into a prospective vessel, the compressed data slowly extracts over time, and once all of that data is fully extracted, the Otsutsuki will fully resurrect within that body and the person will cease to exist. Now the key thing to note here is that it says that Boruto's body will be overwritten by Momoshiki's data. Not only that, it specifies that this only happens when all of the data is fully extracted. So what this means is that Boruto's data should remain unchanged until the moment the Karma Seal is fully extracted and Momoshiki chooses to resurrect. However, this was later contradicted multiple times in the story. First by Shiki stating that Boruto's Otsutsukification has progressed further than he expected and that it was already 80% complete. This shouldn't be the case since it was stated prior that the Karma Seal only extracts the data slowly over time and it doesn't Otsutsukify the body, which means to overwrite Boruto's DNA, until the Karma Seal's data is fully extracted. So since Karma has only extracted 80% of Momoshiki's data, why has the Otsutsukification progress already begun? Now if you think Ishiki misspoke, that simply isn't the case, because as I said before, this was contradicted multiple times. The second time this happened was when Momoshiki took possession of Boruto's body after the battle with Ishiki. He first said that Kawaki's extraction seems to have progressed quite far, then later said that it was just like with Boruto. The progress was about 80% complete. Kawaki's body is almost wholly Otsutsuki at this point. So for one, Momoshiki speaks of the extraction and Otsutsukification progress as if they are the same thing, by concluding that Kawaki's body is almost wholly Otsutsuki, which means to be 100% because 80% of the data was extracted. Now this directly contradicts how Amado explained the process earlier on, which is that the compressed data slowly extracts over time, and when all of that data is fully extracted, Boruto's body will then be overwritten by Momoshiki's data and Boruto himself will cease to exist. So the entire thing doesn't make sense, since Boruto should remain 100% human until the karma is fully extracted, which then leads to him being overwritten. By the way, this isn't specific to Boruto, since this was the same for Kawaki and even Jigen, who was confirmed to be 100% Otsutsuki even though Ishiki never chose to resurrect, thus not overwriting Jigen's DNA. This means that the Otsutsuki data should just exist within the body until the Otsutsuki chooses to resurrect, and that should then trigger the process of overwriting the vessel's DNA. Now I'm sure some of you guys are probably saying that Amado doesn't know more about the Karma Seal than an actual Otsutsuki, so Amado was just wrong. And while that is probably true, the funny thing is that Amado's explanation of how karma works makes more sense, while the Otsutsuki's explanation introduces a plot hole or logical inconsistency. You see, as I said before, DNA consists of all information needed to build your body. This determines things such as your eye color, hair color, your height, and even the size of your nose. The DNA in your cells is responsible for these physical attributes. So if we go by the Otsutsuki's explanation of how karma works, this means that Boruto, who is now 100% pure Otsutsuki, should now only possess Otsutsuki genetics. This confirms that he is no longer human. The DNA that made him look the way he did before has now been overwritten with that of another species. Now there is one argument that some people will use, which is that when Momoshiki revived Boruto, he transformed his remaining 18% of data in karma into Boruto's DNA, so that's why Boruto's physical appearance didn't change. However, what's also stated is that rewritten or not, the data started off as Otsutsuki data originally, so there's no change in that. In fact, Boruto is now 100% pure Otsutsuki. So all this is saying is that Boruto's genetic structure was indeed completely rewritten to that of another species, but it's somehow still his data at the same time, at least 18% of it. So Boruto should still resemble an Otsutsuki since he's 100% Otsutsuki, he's no longer human. Now let's say I did grant this argument, right? Let's say Momoshiki, by changing his data into Boruto's data, allowed him to retain his genetic trait that controls his appearance, even though he's still 100% Otsutsuki, not a human in any way. What would be the explanation for Jigen? Jigen is confirmed to be 100% Otsutsuki. In fact, Jigen is 100% Ishiki Otsutsuki, which is why Ishiki was able to resurrect using Jigen's body. So it isn't the case that Ishiki transformed a percentage of his data into Jigen's data, which allowed Jigen to keep his human characteristics. If that had happened, he wouldn't have been able to resurrect in Jigen, similar to the situation with Momoshiki. So Jigen's very existence directly contradicts that logic. Now, to be honest, we didn't really need anything else to prove this point, but I decided to enlist our trusty friend ChatGPT, which confirmed that if we assume that it's currently possible to completely overwrite an individual's DNA, it is highly likely that their appearance would significantly change. This assumption is based on the fundamental role that DNA plays in determining an individual's physical characteristics. DNA contains the instructions for the synthesis of proteins, and these proteins influence various aspects of a person's appearance, including their facial features, skin color, hair color and texture, eye color, height, and even the body shape. So if a person's DNA were completely replaced with different genetic information, it would stand to reason that these genetic instructions would lead to the production of different proteins and consequently different physical traits. As a result, the individual's appearance would be expected to change in alignment with the newly introduced DNA. Now it also says that the extent and specifics of these changes would depend on the nature of the replacement DNA. The new DNA would of course define the individual's genetic makeup and in turn their appearance, so the exact changes would vary based on the content of the replacement DNA. What it means by this is that if you were to replace John's DNA with that of John's parent or sibling, the extent to which his appearance changes would be significantly less, in comparison to replacing his DNA with that of a Martian's or an animal, which makes perfect sense. This is why Mado's explanation of karma makes more sense than what was explained by Shiki or Momoshiki. In his version, the karma seal doesn't change the vessel's DNA upon extraction. The vessel remains 100% human until the karma is fully extracted and the Otsutsuki chooses to resurrect, thus overwriting the vessel's DNA. In some sense, it would be similar to viruses that lay dormant within the body before one day deciding to attack the surrounding cells, thus corroding that body. The extracted data within the karma seal should behave in a similar way, which would explain why the vessel's appearance doesn't change until the moment the Otsutsuki resurrects, which by the way is exactly how it plays out in Boruto, which is funny, since Jigen, who was already 100% Otsutsuki, didn't gain Ishiki's appearance until Ishiki chose to resurrect, thus rewriting Jigen's DNA. But then you have the contradiction, which is that Jigen's human DNA was 100% overwritten by Shiki's DNA, thus making him 100% Otsutsuki while not having the physical appearance of an Otsutsuki. Now there is a possible way around this inconsistency, which would be that Momoshiki and Ishiki didn't understand the true nature of karma. Amado, who actually did in-depth research into the jutsu, knew exactly how it operated. However, this possible fix is no longer applicable since the story itself confirmed that Momoshiki's explanation was indeed correct by stating that only Otsutsukis are not affected by Ada's charm ability and omnipotence. So Boruto and Kawaki not being affected proves that they have been overwritten. Although you could say that the data just existing in their bodies is enough to classify them as Otsutsuki. So I guess this possible loophole still stands to some extent, but let's be real here guys, the writers will never revisit this, and this is likely just a plot inconsistency or a possible plot hole, or maybe they're the same thing. Now there's also the possibility that genetics doesn't operate in the same way in the Boruto universe as it does in real life. Like shocker, right? Boruto is a fictional universe. Maybe your appearance is tied to your spiritual energy and not your DNA. So when you cease to exist is when your body actually changes. The funny thing is that there is precedent for this in Naruto, which would be the living corpse reincarnation technique. This allows Orochimaru to transfer his soul to someone else's body, thus making it his own. And as we've seen in the case of White Zetsu, Orochimaru was able to transform into his original body immediately upon entry. Now you could argue against this point by saying that Orochimaru's true form, which is the giant white snake, is also physical material since you can interact with it physically. So rather than the white snake being Orochimaru's soul, it just contains his soul in his true body, which is the white snake, which is a physical substance. You could even argue that Orochimaru just used the White Zetsu's ability to transform into other people in order to attain his original form. Now there is the example of the Edo Tensei Impure World Reincarnation technique. This allows the user to bind the soul of a deceased person to a living vessel. Upon this happening, the living vessel takes the form of the summoned soul regardless of the vessel used. So that is a case of the soul directly dictating the physical appearance of the body, which could be applied in a broad sense to everyone in the Naruto universe. Now it is possible that there is other cases of the soul directly dictating the physical appearance of a particular body, but I haven't been able to find it, so let me know in the comment section if you remember any case of this happening at any point in Naruto. But even then, let me know your thoughts on the video itself, because I think that wraps it up. Do you think that this is a plot hole, a plot inconsistency? Do you think that Boruto should look like an actual Otsutsuki since he's 100% pure Otsutsuki? And why didn't Jigen look like an Otsutsuki since he was 100% Ishiki Otsutsuki? Like, there was no space for Jigen's DNA since he was completely overwritten, but at the same time he wasn't completely overwritten. So it's kinda, weird, contradictory, but let me know if I'm reaching in the comment section. If you have any proper explanation for it, drop it in the comments. If you like the video, drop a like. If you're new, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.